Hello everyone. Now today is going to be our third lecture on British English literature. In the last two lectures we talked about the Renaissance period, we talked about the Caroline age, and now today in the lecture we are going to talk about the Restoration period, the Augustan age and the age of Johnson. So basically the Restoration period will be talked about in this lecture. I hope these lectures are going to help you in future and for the preparation that you're doing for your exams, maybe your graduation, your post-graduation. So I just hope these help you. So let's start with the lecture today. I'm going to keep it brief for you so that all the main points are covered within a short span of time. Now, the Restoration period, as we all know, let's revise it. Restoration period begins with the coming of Charles II to reign. Now, Restoration period, it spans from 1660 to 1688, which is 28 years. Restoration period is basically divided into three parts, which is the first one is the Restoration, the second one is the Augustan age, the third one is the age of Johnson. The Augustan age is also called Neoclassical period, which we are going to talk about in the future lecture, in this particular lecture. Now, one very famous thing which happened, important thing that happened, was the formation of the Royal Society. This happened during the Restoration period, the literature of the Restoration period. Now, what was Royal Society? It was founded in London in 1662 to 1663. It marked the start of a scientific enterprise that facilitated the rise of Enlightenment sensibility. It led to scientific inquiry. Use of telescope and microscope led to the discovery of distant and other worlds. Now, England of 17th century was restless due to the rift between Catholics and Protestants. American Revolution and French Revolution were also now, as we know, with the Restoration period, the ban on theatres which were imposed before the Restoration period, before the coming of Charles II to throne, people were not allowed to watch theatres. All these were closed. So now the ban on theatres were lifted. So the plays were written with a lot of consciousness. They were very much aware that if they write something obnoxious, then their plays might get banned. Now this age became a very self-conscious age. Heightened attention to taste, manners, socially acceptable plots were used, and also the playwrights, they wanted to conform to the social acceptability as well. Restoration tragedy was caused due to failure, not by overarching ambition like it was during the Elizabethan and Jacobean age. Now, features of Restoration comedy. They were class-bound, metropolitan genre was used, male and female rivalries were being shown, focus on carnality. Proviso scenes were used. Now, what were those proviso scenes? These were the kind of condition which was put in front of the bridegroom by the bride, by the to-be bride. She used to put the conditions for marriage. So proviso scenes were very, very popular during the Restoration age, and especially they were used during the Restoration comedy. Gossip, intrigue, parallel plots were also very common. Now, comedy of manners during the Restoration comedy. Under the Restoration comedy, comedy of manners also come. Now, what are these? These were made fun of the manners of the upper class. Also, a huge audience, those who used to watch the Restoration drama, they were upper class, but a lot of fun was made on the upper class in this comedy of manners. Restoration comedy invites the audience to participate in exposure of social hypocrisy. Now, a very famous writer of comedy of manners of the Restoration comedy was Thomas Shadwell. He wrote The Sullen Lover, Epsom Wells, Bury Fair. Shadwell wrote in total of 18 plays. One of them was also The Virtuoso. In Virtuoso, he satirized empiricism, excessive rationalism, and signs of age. Now, the very famous five of Restoration comedy were the very five famous names who wrote Restoration comedy. These were George Etheridge, William Congreve, William Wycherley, George Ferguson, Sir John Vanbrugh. Now, drama declined in the first decades of the 18th century as people turned to fictional prose. So now, from this age, while coming to the next age after the Restoration period, the prose was getting popular. By the end of the Restoration period, prose was becoming popular among people. Now, Theatre Licensing Act also came in 1737. And Lord Chamberlain was the official government person who was there in the censor board, who had the power to issue license to the theatres. Now, London became the center of England for commercial enterprises, banking, and arts. So basically, all the people who wanted their jobs, anyone who wanted to see a bigger scope for themselves, so they came to London, and London became a breeding ground for a lot of people. It led to overpopulation of London. It led to the smokiness of London, which was written by the then pamphleteers of those age. One of them was Samuel Pepys, which we are going to discuss in the future minutes of this lecture. Now, William Hogarth, he captured London city's ugly life, which was also full of suffering, poverty, cruelty, and hypocrisy. Hypocrisy of the people who talked in a very decent manner, but they were not that decent with each other. There was a lot of hypocritical behavior that people showed towards each other. So that was being shown by the writers of those times. Coffee house culture, influential and long-lasting relationships were also formed. Now, class consciousness, idea of gentleman, manner and mannerism also developed during the neoclassical age. There was a revival of classical form of arts as well. Now, coming to the Augustan age, which is also a part of the Restoration period, it was derived from the name of Roman Emperor Augustus, flourishing of literature and poetry. Now, Addison, Pope, Swift, Steele imitated works of Roman writers. There was also formation of the Royal Society, and the active members of the Royal Society were Dryden, John Evelyn, Edmund Waller, Bishop Thomas Pratt. Now, as I mentioned about the famous diarist Samuel Pepys, it covers his diaries covers the time span from 1660 to 69. Now, his first entry into his diary was on 1st January 1660. It discusses the coronation of Charles II, the 1665 plague, fire of London, and the Dutch war. So all these topics were covered by Samuel Pepys in his diaries. Now, he was also a president of Royal Society in 1684. Another famous diarist was John Evelyn. His very famous work was Fumi Fugium, an environmental tract railing against the smokiness of London. Now we come to John Dryden. He is also a very, very important name of the Restoration period. He wrote an essay. The work of his essay was the Essay of Dramatic Poesy, which was published in 1668. Now, in this work, it had 4 conversationalists, and the main conversationalist was Neander. Now, in this work, Essay of Dramatic Poesy, Dryden admires the ancients, also pleads for modernization and advancement in arts, rejects Roman comedy and French drama. Now, Roman comedy, Roman works, they were really liked by the Augustan writers. But when it comes to this writer John Dryden, he rejects Roman comedy and French drama. He pleaded for naturalness, sophisticated wit, and structural tightness. Also, he was a very, very big fan of William Shakespeare. Now, the features of Restoration fiction, it was epistolatory in form, which was written in the form of the letters. A lot of allegories were also used. Gossip, sexual, marital intrigues were being involved in the writings of the Restoration fiction. The rogue or rake became the popular type. Now, French romance too became very popular during the Restoration period. John Bunyan, he wrote Grace Abounding. It was an autobiographical narrative about his conversion and life as a preacher, wrote while he was in prison for 12 years. Now, another work of John Bunyan was Pilgrim's Progress. It was presented in dramatic episodes. They talked about faithful, despair, hopeful, diffidence. These were the characters. So, faithful, despair, hopeful, diffidence were the characters in Pilgrim's Progress, written by John Bunyan. It was an allegory about faith and salvation. Another work of John Bunyan was The Life and Death of Mr. Badman, an allegory warning readers against wickedness. The Holy War was another work. It was an allegory about an entire town that was taken over. Now, John Dryden was made the Poet Laureate of England. Another works written by John Dryden, very famous works, they were Macflecknoe, Absalom and Achitophel, The Medal, Astrea Redux, To His Sacred Majesty, and To His Sacred Majesty, he praised the peace monarchy had restored. Annus Mirabilis was another work published in 1666. It is famous for its preface where Dryden defined wit as delightful imaging of poems, persons, action, passion, or things. Achitople, Absalon and Achitople, it was written in an allegory form, and it was written to satirize the Catholic monarch and political and religious issues. Here, Absalon is the Duke of Monmouth and Achitople is the first Earl of Shaftesbury. Another work, The Hind and the Panther, it talked about the rift which was there between the Catholics and Protestants. Here, Hind symbolizes the Roman Church and Panther, it symbolizes the Anglican Church. Samuel Butler, another very famous name of the Restoration period, he wrote Hudibras in complete 8-syllable couplets. Sir Hudibras and Squire Ralph were the main characters. Now, by the end of this age, the Restoration period, Theatre Licensing Act was implemented in 1737, and Lord Chamberlain was the official officer of the censor board. Now, this licensing act was required because people saw a lot of decency happening on the stage during the showing of the theatre, and therefore there was a demand of the licensing act, and it came, and then this is what happened by the end of the Restoration period. Now, after this period came the age of enlightenment, which we are going to talk about in our next lecture. So see you there.